You're now live.
We are live. That was definitely easier today. I'm going to call us to order. This is Senate Finance. And today we're going to do S1, which has been sent back to us from the House. And then we are going to start slogging our way through the miscellaneous tax bill, which if we could vote out tonight would be wonderful. If not, I anticipate getting that done tomorrow because that will probably go to conference. And then we only have a few bills left. We're going to be getting those out and watch your emails because the schedule is, we're in to hurry up and wait. So S1 is the renewable power portfolio, baseload renewable. It's Rygate. And Avram Pat is here to, House made a few changes and Dylan Zwicky is here. So Avram, why don't you tell us what the House did to our bill?
Okay, thank you. For the record, Representative Avram Pat, I was the reporter of Senate Bill 1 for the House Energy and Technology Committee. And we basically made one, I wouldn't call it a change, I would call it an addition or what we think is an enhancement to the bill dealing with the contingency plan that you had put into the bill in the event that the plant is closing, a contingency plan for dealing with the economic and other impacts of that, should that be what ends up happening. First of all, the proposed addition was proposed to us by our committee vice chair, Representative Sibilia. And it was basically, I refer to it as adding a little bit more specificity to who would be involved in working in this plan, in addition to the two state officials mentioned in the plan as we received it, in the bill as we received it. The Secretary of Commerce and Community Development in consultation with the Commissioner of Forest Parks and Recreation. We wanted to just assure that people who were from the area and directly affected in the event of a closing would also be involved in the plan. And so we simply added that would also be done in consultation with the Northern Vermont Development Association, which is both the Regional Planning Commission and the Economic Development Corporation for that area, that the commissioner choose a Vermont resident who is involved in the forestry industry in the Rygate catchment area, lumber catchment area. And the plant owner, and that those three people or entities should be specified. We also said that for the sake of people in the community and loggers and others affected by this, that there should be one evening public hearing during the course of this that people could attend and be heard. The one other addition was that the owner of the plant would pay to the Department of Forest and Parks and Recreation an amount of $10,000 to cover any additional expenses in holding the public hearing and the process of doing this contingency plan. We did hear testimony from Dylan Zwicky, their representative, who's here at this meeting, as well as a letter from one of the directors of the company that they were fully agreeable to that. So that basically, in summary, we fully agreed that there should be such a contingency plan. We wanted to make it a little bit more specific that people directly affected in the Rygate catchment area, as we call it, would be participating in it.
Okay. Ellen, do you have anything to add to that? Is that?
Nope, that's it. The other thing, though, the first instance of amendment you may see is fixing a typo. So.
Okay.
I'll just add that was actually proposed by the Ways and Means Committee to the House, only because we had voted the bill out of our committee already before that typo was noticed, and it was briefly sitting in Ways and Means. So they in order to move things along, and thanks to Ellen, it was their amendment to fix that typo.
Okay, I think we did something like that this morning on the floor. Okay, Dylan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. For the record, Dylan Zwicky with Leonine Public Affairs on behalf of Stored Solar. I know the committee's has a busy afternoon in front of you, so I'll be very brief. We appreciate the work that Representative Pat and his colleagues in the House did on S1. And as he had testified just now, we're fully supportive of both participating in the contingency planning process and contributing financially towards that process. So we would respectfully urge the committee to concur with the House proposal of amendment.
Okay, committee. Questions, discussion, Senator Hardy, and then Senator Bray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a question for Ellen. I have two questions. One is looking at the thing that corrects the typo. It just says you're replacing provider with provider. So I'm trying to find it in the bill. It looks like you're replacing the same word with the same word.
Yep, in the draft that passed the Senate, provider was accidentally struck. So it needs to be unstruck. And so I know it looks a little weird, but it needs to be unstruck. I
see. Okay. And then my second question for you.
Not typo. Okay.
I was like, it's the same word, but I was not, I'm so used to not paying. Yeah. Anyway, you guys get it.
The line went a little further than it should have.
So my second question is in the language, it's on page 2 of the amendment, or actually the bottom of page 1, that the secretary or the commissioner it's page 2, shall render the owners of Rygate a statement for $10,000. I thought that the owners were paying for it. This just the language, I don't understand the language, the render a statement.
Render to, so it's a bill. So they're going to send a bill for services.
Okay, it's a bill, it's not a check. Okay.
Right, the commissioner sends the bill, the owner shall pay it within 30 days.
Got it. Okay.
Receipt.
Got it. Thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Senator Bray.
Thank you. I had the same provider question. So all set. Thank you.
Okay, so committee, no other questions? Senator McDonald.
I appreciate the Senate committee hopes that the plant's going to work something out and none of this will be necessary. And thanks for kind of putting a spare tire out there in the event that it doesn't go the way we would hope it would go. So that's helpful.
Okay, committee. The bill is on the notice calendar. We passed over it today. I'm not sure if I need a motion. We don't have the bill, but I think a motion to recommend that the Senate concur would be in order.
Madam Chair, will you take a head count on the
A head
Senate
count
members?
would also work. all right, all those in favor of concurring with the House proposal of amendment, raise your hand or give me a thumbs up. All right, I'm seeing that as 700. Senator McDonald, you're the reporter, so you can report that tomorrow.
Shall do,
That
Madam
is-
Chair.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Avram.
Thank you. Off
You're
to a
going
floor
to-
session.
Yes. Isn't Zoom wonderful? You don't even get to run up and down stairs. Okay. Yesterday we did a quick walkthrough of the miscellaneous tax bill. I've asked Abby, because this one's got to come out. If we can't do it tonight, we should do it tomorrow. More first thing, we may even cut right after the floor. We're going to take further testimony on the things we kind of walked through quickly yesterday. And then we had several things that we were going to add. Our version of H53, the feminine hygiene product, the yield or tax rate bill. The one thing I came up with that we hadn't made a decision on and needs to go on this, I'm hearing, but we haven't voted, to put the EITC and the dependent and child extension of that benefit that are in the federal tax codes that are not included. And yesterday we heard we could do those. The one we haven't reached a final decision on is PPP. So we will have to reach a discussion on that if we're going to do anything or what we're going to do before we can finish this bill out. I have to leave at 2:45. We've scheduled a break. Hopefully that'll work to go talk about 360 in appropes. They appropriated the money. I don't think it's going to take me more than 5 minutes to tell them we just spent the money they've already appropriated, but I will go do that. So first, this is H436, miscellaneous changes to Vermont tax law. And this is the healthcare sunset extension, and there's Nolan, there's Jen. Okay. So just let us know, give us a quick walkthrough on that one and some costs associated with it.
Sure. Jennifer Carby, Legislative Counsel. So I will talk to you about what the words do and let Nolan talk to you about what the numbers are. This extends, the sections 13 and 14 extend two existing sunsets on a couple of taxes. So one of them deals with, I don't know if you want language up or if you're looking at the language yourselves. What is your preference on
Would you like the language up? Probably be helpful.
Okay, no problem. All right, you should be able to see that. Make it, maybe make it a little bigger. There we go. All right. So section 13 would extend the home health agency provider tax. It's known in the statutes as the home health agency assessment. So this is an amount that is assessed on the home health agencies. It helps to draw down federal Medicaid match, and then that money goes back to the providers in rates, Medicaid rates. This currently is set to be repealed on July 1st. Section 13 would extend that date out for another 2 years until July 1st, 2023. Section 14 would extend the health information technology portion of the healthcare claims tax. So that is right now is 0.199 of 1% of claims that goes, that is assessed along with the 0.8% that goes for other purposes on healthcare claims. This 0.199 goes into the Health IT Fund and is used for health information technology purposes. This, as was the case in section 13, this is set to expire on July 1st of this year. This would push that sunset date out another 2 years until July 1st, 2023. That's it as far as language.
Okay, questions at this point?
And then Nolan can talk to you about the fiscal aspects.
Okay, Nolan, why don't you tell us about the fiscal impact?
Okay, so for the record, Nolan Langwell, the Joint Fiscal Office, Section 13, which is the Home Health Agency, the Home Health Agency assessment, that raises or estimate to raise about $5.8 million a year. Well, that's what it's at now. So if you were to let it sunset, we would have $5.8 million less in the budget. And then for Section 14, which extends the sunset on the claims assessment specific for the HIT fund, that's $4 million. And that $4 million goes into what's known as the Health Information Technology Fund. And it funds various health information technology initiatives. And we get different levels of match rates for different particular things. So in some of those things, it's matched with 50-50 federal dollars. In some things, it's 90-10, 90 federal, 10 state. So those dollars go a long way for specific to health information technology initiatives. And I will actually send a report to Faith to post if she hasn't already. It's the annual report on the receipts and expenditures and balance of the HIT fund. So if anyone wants to know how much is raised, how much has been raised, where it goes, I will send it to Faith and she'll put it on the link.
Okay, Nolan, that 5.8 million, is that what is paid in, not, or is it include the federal match?
That's just what's paid in, and then that money is used to draw a match.
And that's, okay, that's state dollars.
State dollars.
Okay, any questions, committee?
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Yes, Senator Pearson.
Nolan, since the law would have had that sunset, is it in the whatever we call it, the fiscal budget, that the estimates, why am I blanking on the term, but is it baked in there as though
Yes.
people assumed we would extend the sunset, which is,
Yes.
I might say, rather cheeky, but anyway, I need to know if it's already in the estimate.
It's in the base, yes.
We've extended it every year, I think, for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
This one was somewhat the home health, because it was set up before we have some private providers, and this one took some negotiation. And I wasn't on finance when it started. I was when the solution came back, but this gets payments from both private home health providers and what used to be designated agencies.
And with this, the reason the sunset was put in, I believe it originated originally in Ways and Means, was not that they wanted it to go away, but rather they wanted to force the conversation every 2 years of whether people want it to still be in existence. So it's really just to force this conversation we're having now.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. If not, we'll move along. So thank you. And we are not that far ahead.
Hey, Madam Chair, you're going to need to move closer.
I'm sorry, I'm sliding back again. Next, we are on to section 16, workers' comp. And is Damien with us? I know I saw Steve Monahan here.
Senator Cummings, Damien isn't gonna be on until 1:30.
Okay, so
You're
we're
early.
early. We've got 10 whole minutes. So maybe what I can do is talk to people about dividing up 360 for tomorrow. And I'll do section 1 and just introduce it and do the findings and intent. Section 2 is the bulk of the board, and I'm trying to get 6 out of this. I think this is not the one I've divided up. Where's the one I divided up? And we have a side by side that Maria, or section by section, but as far as I can figure out, section 2, there's a whole section on the board until we got down to 8086 and 8085, and that gets more into the pre-construction, construction, and that could be broken out to do sections 3 through 6, and then 6 through 11, 12 through 15, 16 through 18, and 19 through 21. And I know Senator Pearson has been very active in this, and Senator Hardy.
Happy to do whatever makes sense, Madam Chair.
Well, I thought I'd give you section 2 down to approximately 8086. You and Ruth, and I'd give Ruth the second section of that. Probably 6 through 11, and then Senator Brock, 12 through 15 is all the property tax, the Washington Electric co-ops. 16 through 18 is the workforce provisions. I thought I would give to Senator McDonald, and then Senator Bray has the polls definition that you put in and the rest of the bill. But feel free as you look at this to divide it up anyway. I tried to give folks that aren't chairs or don't get to do a lot of presentations, the bulk. I know Senator Sirotkin said he had a lot of bills to do. But that's as far as I've gotten. So take a look at that section by section. The first one, that section 2 is the really big one. And it's possible that Senator Hardy, 6 through 11, you might have some more that could go down to Senator Brock. So take a look and see what seems logical to you, a good breaking point.
Okay.
I've been working that through. I think
Chris, will you
that'll
just
work.
tell me where you're going and where I should start, and then I'll tell you, Randy, where I'll stop and you can
Right.
start. Okay.
All right, let's take a look.
See what it is. And hopefully we will get this one on its way.
Are you looking at the bill, Chris? No. Do you want to do this by email or?
Might be easier than taking time now.
I'm looking
Hey,
for.
I've been working at this in between. I've been working at this most of the morning. I thought I was just gonna knock it out, and then I said, "Oh, I've really got to sit here and read through all of this." So
Senator Cummings?
I see Damien is here,
Great.
and Steve Monahan is back with us. So we were ahead of time. So we took care of some other committee business. And we are now back to section 16, workers' compensation. Damien, Steve, I don't know how you want to deal with this. I guess, Damien, this is your field of expertise. So tell us, and then Steve, you can fill us in.
Sure. So for the record, Damian Leonard, Legislative Counsel. And is everyone looking at the language on their device? This is my first time in finance in a while, so, or would it be helpful if I pulled it up?
Yeah, it'd be helpful if you pulled it up, I think.
Okay. do that.
I think most of us are now looking at 360 and seeing what they're reporting tomorrow.
Okay, so the language here is we enact this language every year. The 21 VSA 711 basically requires the legislature to revisit this formula every year. For this year, we're maintaining the rates at exactly the same rate they were last year and the year before that, and possibly longer than that, but I can't remember at this point. This is the statutory default rate. So that's a 1.4% rate of contribution on direct calendar year premiums paid for workers' compensation insurance. And then the contribution rate for self-insured workers' compensation losses and workers' compensation losses of these corporations approved under 21 VSA Chapter 9 are essentially, and Steve can provide a little more context with this, but they're groups of organizations that have grouped together to insure their workers' compensation losses. So they pay a 1% on their losses for the year. And these percentages, like I said, have remained the same for at least 2 years now. And the amounts, Steve can talk about why they recommended keeping them the same. So I'll let Steve take over unless there are questions about the language.
Okay, any questions at this point? Okay, Steve.
Thank you. Steve Monahan, Director of Workers' Compensation and Safety for the Vermont Department of Labor. As Damian said, we're proposing to keep the assessment rate the same. The program, workers' compensation program, costs about $2.5 million. To date, we're a little bit under what we were at the same period last year, maybe 300,000, but we believe we have enough of a cushion to cover any shortage, and there's still 3 months to go in the collection process. So we think we will have enough to cover that. The one correction, the self-insured, currently there are no group self-insured in the state, and they would be approved by the Department of Financial Regulation. There are between, I don't have the exact number, 15 and 18 self-insured employers in the state, and that's including the state of Vermont and the League of Cities and Towns that pay the assessment on losses. That's the amount of indemnity, medical, voc rehab, other types of things paid out to injured workers in any given year. So they pay whatever they're paying out in that year. That assessment is on that. It's fairly straightforward, hasn't been changed in a number of years. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to address them.
Okay, I see Senator Sorokin and then Senator Hardy.
So, Steve, you probably can anticipate this question because I ask it every year. My understanding is that workers' comp rates have been going down. So my guess is this 1.4% yields less money, and that the intent of this surcharge is to fund your division. How does your division operate on less money? And if you need less money, why isn't the surcharge going down?
One, it doesn't fund the division. It only funds the workers' comp program.
Okay.
Within the division.
Okay.
We have done our best to balance it. We're, as I said, normally it's about $2.5 million. With the pandemic, for a variety of reasons, we've actually are probably closer to $2.25 million. We're balancing. I think overall premiums it's always an estimate. We had initially thought premiums would raise about 185. Looks like they're closer to 100 over direct calendar year premiums. Would be about 180 million. That turned out to be slightly lower than that, but there was, as I said, there was enough cushion there to offset it, so we don't have to change it.
I guess
We also have some money. There was an assessment for technology a few years back. I was hoping, it's probably 12 years now. I was hoping to spend it on modernization. Several attempts hadn't flied. I am happy to report that we have an RFP bid meeting next week on moving. So hopefully we'll finally get that accomplished. But that money has been sitting there waiting for that expenditure. If you look over the history, we have either increased the assessment or decreased the assessment when we felt we were able to do so.
But haven't workers' comp premiums gone down significantly in the last 2 years? And I just don't understand the math.
Well, the rate that employers pay per employee on average has decreased. But employment prior to this year, employment has increased, or the total payroll that is insured had increased. So even though the rate that an employer was paying had decreased, if they have more employees and or a higher payroll, the direct calendar year premium was higher. And so that had balanced off. That probably won't be the case this year. We're anticipating that, but that means that some years we collect slightly more than anticipated, in some years slightly less. And it's always somewhat of a guess as to where that's going to fall, but that's how I at least am confident that we won't end up in the negative.
So is your budget funded in the budget at a certain level? And if this doesn't deliver the amount of revenue, is there any danger that you won't get your money and that staff might be cut?
No, there is an appropriation made, if that's what you're asking. That's what we try to stay within. And that hasn't been an issue. We were able to spend and make up if we had to. There was, back when they transferred the program, Workers, Labor and Industry became, part of it was transferred down and merged with DET. There was evidently some error made in how funds were done at that time. We actually had a $500,000 deficit because of how some things had cleared, but nobody was laid off. That was made up. I'm actually hoping to hire back a position that had been frozen to assist with some of our technical needs.
So one last question, Madam Chair. So you expect to receive, based at this rate, the same amount of money from the surcharge as you received last year?
I expect that we will collect between 2 million and 2.5 million at the end, when all is said and done.
And how much did you collect last year?
About 2.5 million.
Okay, thank you.
So it'll be slightly less, but as I said, I think we have some cushion.
Marty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if this is a question for Damien or Steve or either of you, but my understanding of workers' compensation is that there are a whole bunch of different rates that different types of employers pay. So this 1.4 is a surcharge on top of that rate? And so every type of employer pays this 1.4%. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. So it doesn't matter what kind of employer they are or what their other rates are. It's the same for everybody.
It's right. It's a
Yes.
pass-through that's
Got it.
assessed on them.
Okay. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Questions on this one? No. Okay, thank you. And are we ahead? We're still a little bit ahead, but I think Commissioner Bolio is here. I thought
I am here, Madam Chair.
Melissa Corbin is here, Jessica is here. Okay, this is the meals and rooms tax. Commissioner, do you have anything to add or tell us about this one?
Yeah, I'm happy to intro it. I'm actually going to let Rebecca talk about it. There's two
Okay.
parts on meals and rooms tax. One is the meal delivery platform. That was a tax department proposal. And the other is exemptions for nonprofits on alcohol. I'll let Rebecca intro that.
Okay, so Rebecca, why don't you talk us through this? What's the tax department's thinking?
Yeah, and I think you guys got a great summary from Abby about this yesterday too. This is just adding meal delivery platforms to the definition of a meals operator, which would just be clarifying that these platforms like the DoorDash and Grubhubs are the ones responsible for collecting and remitting the meals and rooms tax.
What about the folks that bring you the raw materials with directions on how to cook them? Do they get swept into this? I am forgetting the names, but they seem to be proliferating.
Like a Blue Apron, for example, or something.
Yeah,
like
they
that.
they
Yeah,
they
those are
send
usually through
you,
the mail.
yeah, or yeah, are this,
I believe, and Craig, feel free to weigh in on this if I'm remembering this. Maybe I should just get back to the committee on this because this is something that we had a discussion about with our legal counsel. And I believe that because those are deconstructed and it takes an element of preparation, they're considered food and therefore tax exempt. Whereas if they were like delivered in without the preparation, needing to happen on the consumer end, it would be a meal and then would be taxable.
more like groceries?
Mm-hmm.
If I went to the
I'll follow up with
grocery
that.
store, I can get pre-chopped
Exactly.
carrots and garlic and take them home and look up a recipe on the computer. Okay. Committee, questions so far? All right. The alcohol, that one we had some questions on yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. This was clarifying existing law that about the taxability of alcoholic beverages in circumstances where meals and non-alcoholic beverages are already exempt. The language in front of you would clarify that alcoholic beverages are exempt in all the cases where meals or non-alcoholic beverages are exempt. And this was a little bit of a sticky issue at the tax department. It turns out we did some research and it turns out that, nonprofits were interpreting this different ways and there's clearly a need for clarity in the statute. And yeah, that's what you see in front of you here. It doesn't change the circumstances where meals would be taxable or exempt, just adds alcoholic beverages clearly to that.
Came up is if your hospital was doing a benefit dinner at the local hotel, are those meals exempt?
Likely not if the hotel is the one furnishing the meal or the beverages. There are rules around these exemptions for meals or beverages that apply to on-premises events or off-premises events. And for the off-premises events, a meal is only exempt if it's being sold by someone that is not currently a Meals and Rooms licensee. So like a hotel, providing the food in that case wouldn't meet that test. And the reason for that is, to prevent abuse, like where a restaurant says, like, oh, every Friday, all our stuff is tax-free because we're, donating our proceeds to.
Yeah, we did have a bill that would have made those meals tax exempt. Senator McDonald found many possible scenarios for abuse on that, putting on his 8th grader hat. And I know we turned it down. So the question came up is if the hospital was doing a benefit dinner, but this doesn't change that. If the hotel has a license to pay tax, then it's taxable. It's only if the meals aren't. Okay. Any other questions, committee? Okay, Jessica Oskey and Melissa. All right. Jessica.
Melissa's going to start.
Melissa's going to start. Okay.
Thank you so much for having us. I really appreciate the time, and I'll be very brief.
We're having a little trouble. You're doing my getting away from the microphone routine.
Can you hear me better now?
That's better.
Okay, I will put my projecting voice on instead of my soft voice. Thank you very much for having us. I'll be very brief. I just have a few comments that I wanted to make following up Deputy Commissioner's comments from the Tax Department. So my name for the record is Melissa Corbin, and I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Brewers Association. With me today is Jessica Oskey from Necrason Group, and they are the VBA's lobbyist. We are here today to discuss Section 2 of H 436 as passed by the House. We'll provide an overview of the issue addressed in the bill and explain why we support these changes. As a bit of background, the Vermont Brewers Association is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 1995 to promote and strengthen the culture of craft brewing in Vermont through marketing, education, and advocacy for Vermont-made beer. We achieve our mission and support one of the largest economic drivers in the state by holding 2 annual fundraisers, the Vermont Brewers Festival at Killington in March and Burlington in July. To the outside observer, these festivals might just appear as another listing on an event calendar. However, our festivals draw 10% more out-of-state patrons than the largest ticketed beer festival in the United States. With 47% of our attendees coming to Vermont specifically for the events that we produce, we contribute $2.3 million to our economy in one weekend. Over the course of the industry annually, that number jumps to $367 million worth of economic activity. The application of the meals and rooms tax to alcoholic beverages served by nonprofits at fundraising events like ours has been a confusing area of the law for many years. Most nonprofits do not believe that the tax applies to their sales and do not, in fact, pay the tax. If you've been to one of our festivals, you know that when you purchase a ticket, included in the price of your admissions charge is a branded tasting glass and a fixed number of beer samples. In August of 2019, our accountant brought to our attention that we'd been paying taxes on the alcohol portion of our admission sales and that those sales should have been exempt. Upon this discovery, we entered into a long and complicated dispute with the tax department that was only recently resolved. As part of that resolution, the department and the VBA agreed that the VBA is not required to remit any meals and rooms taxes with respect to the alcohol portion of our festival admission charges. We're grateful that the tax department has proposed to clarify the statute going forward to settle any confusion for the VBA and other nonprofit entities that hold similar fundraising events. For a brief explanation of the proposed changes, I'm going to turn things over to our lobbyist, Jessica Oskey.
Hi, Jessica Oskey with Necrason Group. And I just wanted to point out, you might not be able to see it, but Senator Sorokin and I am wearing my name tag. So, okay. Excuse me?
Nothing.
So
Heather, that's an inside joke.
Well, he has a bill introduced requiring lobbyists to all wear name tags. So I wanted to make sure I had mine on today. As Melissa said, Section 2 of the bill clarifies that certain alcohol sales by nonprofit organizations are not taxable. The rooms and meals tax statute in the definitions section. Like many statutes, it's more than just definitions. It's actually lays out the policy within the definitions. So it's a complicated statute. And for context, in our written testimony that we submitted, I included the entire definition section with these changes embedded so you can see it in context. There are two definitions that are amended, the definition of taxable meal and the definition of alcoholic beverages. And they are amended to clarify that in certain specific situations, the exemption for meals and beverages includes alcoholic beverages. And as the deputy commissioner and the commissioner noted, these are relative to meals and beverages sold by nonprofit organizations in certain circumstances. And this is not a change of practice. This is a clarification of what is the current practice by most nonprofits. They're currently not paying this tax. The tax department recently did an informal survey to confirm that this is indeed the understanding of the law in the field. The exemption in Section 2 applies to alcoholic beverages that are served by nonprofits like the Vermont Brewers Association as part of fundraisers or public awareness events such as festivals, farm-to-table dinners, tastings, and other similar events. These are events usually for which the cost of the alcoholic beverages are built into the ticket price. It's our understanding, and I think confirmed by the department, that this exemption would not apply to events that offer catered for-profit beverage services, even if those events are hosted by a nonprofit. So if you go to a music festival and there's a beer tent, even if the music festival is hosted by a nonprofit, if the beer tent is run by a catering company, that would not be exempt sales. So the VBA is pleased and relieved that the tax department has requested this clarification and happy to support this section of H 436.
Any questions at this point? Any comments? Okay. Thank you. And
Thank
this, I have one question. In order to sell alcohol, you have to have a liquor license, right?
So is that question directed at me specifically?
Well, or probably the tax department. But if you have a liquor license, I guess usually they're owned by a business. So I assume that if Joe's Tavern is providing the beer tent for the nonprofit, I'm just trying to see, do some like fire stations, I suppose they do, and fraternal organizations, they do have liquor licenses, right? Okay.
I presume
But
that's
it's
the case if
possible
they're
to-
serving, but yeah, out of our wheelhouse at the tax department, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. I will just trust that that is possible to have a liquor license and not be a normally taxed entity.
I do think, Madam Chair, one quick comment on that. I mean, when we did our research on this, we noted that there were very few nonprofits that were directly selling, right? Most nonprofits who sell alcohol do it through a vendor or do it through a caterer. And that would not, we don't believe that that would pass the net proceeds test for on-premises sales to be exempt, which is why we think the scope of this is quite narrow.
Okay. I was just going back to my days on the Liquor Control Board, and there were, you know, every week there were catering permits so that a local restaurant or bar could cater an event with their liquor license. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you. This
Thank you very
is
much.
all right. Okay. Carol Dawes is here. Hi, Carol. How are things in Barry?
Chugging along.
Okay, so you're here to talk to us about raising the fees on
Yes.
certain documents. So tell us what that is.
For the record, Carol Dawes, Berry City Clerk and Treasurer. I'm the legislative chair of the Municipal Clerk and Treasurers Association. 2 years ago, the legislature passed Act 38, which changed recording fees for land records, things recorded in our vaults. We went from $10 a page to $15 a page. It was the first increase we'd had in over 10 years. And we designated $4 of that $15 fee to a restoration and preservation fund, which is helping us digitize land records, helping us move into the 21st century. And as a side note, that has been incredibly helpful during COVID when our clerk's offices have been closed and had limited access, and attorneys and realtors have needed to get in to look at our land records. They can do a lot of that work digitally now, remotely. So when we did the fee change 2 years ago, we made changes in the town clerk fee section of Title 32. We were working in section 1671, which is where the fees are listed. After the act was adopted and went into effect, we realized that we had missed the recording fees that are listed in the section included in this bill, in 32 VSA 5258, which is documents that are recorded in the land records in conjunction with tax sales. They currently are still in statute at $10 a page, and it's our request we think of this as mostly housekeeping, to standardize the recording fees across the board. And so what we'd like to have them reflect the same recording fees that were adopted 2 years ago.
Okay, committee, any discussion? Senator Hardy.
I just have a brief question for, I guess, for Carol. Thank you for being here. Looking at the bill, there's most of the fees are changed from 10 to 15, but there's one that's the collector's deed that's changed from 30 to 15. What's up with that one?
It's everything else is recorded on a per page basis, and so we wanted the deed to be the same thing, and a collector's deed is 3 pages long, so the $30 reflected 3 pages at $10 a page, and now the $15 would just cover that 3-page deed.
Okay, but you're obviously okay with that.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? If not, we'll move on to section 9 and 10, current use, and Chris Delia. And forgive me, Madam Chair, but I'm going to leave because I'm prepping for a school budget revote next week. Oh, yeah, you've got your hands full.
So thank you, committee.
Okay, we'll see you. Okay, Chris.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, committee members. Chris Delia, President, Vermont Bankers Association. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. I'll be very brief. I want to thank Ms. Shepard for flagging this particular item in this bill. The language is word for word what we did a couple of years ago regarding current use and eliminating the process of having to ask for the state to subordinate their lien to a mortgage. And that process has worked well, especially in this hyper real estate market. The state is still protected because that contingent lien will turn into an actual lien if the property were pulled out of current use or developed. So the state was protected. It made it easier for property owners to refinance and for sales to go forward. So again, this language is word for word what you did a couple of years ago and the parties all agreed to. So thank you for taking a look at it. And I just asked, depending on how your discussions go with various bills that may move or not move, that this is one of those pieces that you just find a home for somewhere along the way.
Okay, Abby, if we did this a couple years ago, why are we doing it now? Are you there? Chris, what? I'm not saying, there's Abby. So, or Rebecca, whoever, what happened? I remember doing this, probably at a time when there were a lot of refis going on, but what happened that we need to redo it?
Sure. So for the record, Abby Shepherd, Office of Legislative Counsel, this was what was intended to be passed a few years ago. What was added in was a repeal of the fee for the lien subordination, because there's no longer any need for the request to subordinate the lien. The fee was being removed from statute. There was a glitch, a technical mistake made on which section was repealed. And rather than repealing the fee section, this section of statute was repealed. So because this is being fixed retroactively, the whole subsection of statute has to be added back in. We can't just go in and say, oh no, that, we'll fix that statute.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the line went, it's like the last one. The line went through something we didn't mean it to go through, but it still struck. And this one, just the wrong statute got cited or section got cited to be removed. So we are redoing. Okay.
And the way that this is drafted, there will be no break in effect. So it will put the statute back into effect as of July 1st last year.
Okay. Was this the one, Senator Brock, you wanted to know if anything bad had happened yesterday?
It was, I believe. Does anything cause this provision?
To my knowledge, Senator, I have not heard from any of my mortgage lenders that there's that anything bad has happened in the market, but we just want to make sure it gets corrected.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any questions at this point? All right. This has been easy. All right. We're going to come on to section 15, and we are now, this is not scheduled. We are almost 15 minutes ahead of schedule. So Senator Hardy.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Given that we're ahead of schedule, I sent you a note. I don't know if you saw it in the chat.
You said you wanted to discuss two things, yes.
Two provisions in the drafts I sent to people earlier this week, and I was hoping we could talk about them while the tax department people are still here, because Abby has drafted these and consulted with them, and they're basically just asking for information from tax. And so wanted the deputy commissioner and commissioner.
Why don't you tell us what they are so everybody knows?
And Abby, if you have the drafts, but the drafts cover a couple things, but or multiple things, but the things that I'm interested in seeing if we can get into miscellaneous tax is, one is regarding a situation that has come up in Salisbury, but it has happened to many other towns too, where they have a new digester that's coming online later this year. It's an enormous project, enormous property, and they have to value that property, and it's complicated. And the local lister is not able to do it him or herself, and so they need to hire people to do it. And often these complex valuations require lots of skill, and then also often they're litigated. So it's really hard for these tiny little towns like Salisbury, which only has a couple thousand people, to manage them. And these are properties that are both municipal tax and the education property tax. So there was actually a recommendation in the tax structure report that would have asked the tax department to make recommendations on
assisting local municipalities with these complex valuations. And there's apparently been some assistance for a town that has, I believe, a dam in it or some sort of renewable energy project in it that's also complicated. So this is just asking tax to come back to us with recommendations on how they could assist local municipalities with these complex valuations. So that's the first one, and it would require a report back next January from them.
Commissioner, do you have a problem with reporting back?
I don't know that we were familiar with that one yet, but I think it's fine probably. If it's just asking us to provide recommendations, I don't see how that would be.
Yeah, I believe Abby talked to Rebecca. Is that correct? I don't want to make assumptions here, but, or Abby, if you want to weigh in on who you consulted with at tax. Sure.
So I consulted with Jill Remick, and I can share that language to post on the committee's website. I'll send that right now.
That would be great. Just that language. In the amendment, I also had some assistance for the town of Salisbury, but I'm mostly interested in moving forward. How do we help municipalities with these complex?
Okay, but wait, in your proposal, is there an appropriation for the town of Salisbury?
There is, but I'm not interested in going forward with that. I'm mostly just
okay, because that would get this bill in appropriation.
Yeah, no. I get that. It's only this language to have ask tax to make recommendations on how to help us, municipalities. And this, as I said, was something that was in the tax structure report that was recommended that we pursue to try to help with these. And there'll likely be more and more of them as they come up.
Bellows Falls and the dam have been.
That's the one, yeah.
A proverbial issue since I've been in the legislature. Senator Bray.
Yeah, I was just I don't remember other than, Bellows Falls, Connecticut River, generation stations, complex valuations. Has the state chipped in? I mean, the state stands to gain as well as the municipality. Is there a history of the state helping chip into the cost of doing these complex valuations, basically as a partner to the municipality that's a host to the structure?
Yeah, there is some history there, and I must say I'm not a huge expert on this, but there's an appropriation that comes to the tax department to also hire experts that helps with that, and there's also there's another appropriation that helps reimburse some of the municipal costs for that. So. I will say generally the idea of complex utility valuation has been something that's been on our radar and probably ripe for discussion. It's one of the projects that we had wanted to take on in 2020 that COVID really undermined a little bit, but is still on our radar for all of the reasons that you just described, right? It's difficult to do. It's often well-resourced organizations against perhaps small towns. We really want to ensure consistency. So I think to that degree, we're happy to be part of that conversation.
Right. And this is a non-trivial expense. I think the figure I've seen in the press is I believe it's a $20 million project. So it's not bigger than the average farm project.
Yeah, and I think utility companies have also talked about the need to have more consistency on this, and I suspect that they'll be willing partners to talk about this as well. We've had some very preliminary discussions with them, but again, the pandemic sort of undermined that progress.
Thank you.
Sure.
So that is the first part of it. And thank you, Commissioner. And I think Abby's getting the language to Faith, perhaps. And then the second one is also asking tax to look at something. And this is, as we've been discussing the boom in certain sectors of real estate in our state. I was working with Abby and others to try to figure out the different types of properties, particularly second homes or second properties. And apparently what I've learned, and Deputy Commissioner, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's not a lot of data that differentiates different kinds of second homes. So like the hunting camp that's worth, $30
$30,000 or, you know, just a little cabin in the woods is classified. the same
Outhouse,
as-
yes.
Yes, they're classified the same as the multi-million-dollar second home mansion in terms of how the data is for the tax department. And so when I was trying to figure out, is there a way we can differentiate and make, you know, differences in tax rates or differences in how we look at them from a tax perspective, there's just not the data there. So this second part of the language would just ask the tax department to make recommendations on how they could collect the data or differentiate the data. Doesn't ask them to do it yet, but it asks them to make recommendations on doing it. And my understanding is that you're actually in the middle of some kind of project that's sort of related to this. I was scrolling, trying to find it in my email, but you probably can just tell us that, yeah, I'll just let you tell us because Abby was emailing me some things. I think that you told her, Rebecca.
Sure. Yeah, I think you're probably talking about our property tax modernization project, which is something going on in PVR right now that will be kind of fully implemented at the end of 2022, I think. And this is just modernizing our grand list software on the back end, which should allow us to do a lot more with the grand list and with our guidance to towns, for example, and make things for towns a lot easier too. So I think that's probably
yeah, that's what it looks like. And so this would just ask you to tell us how you could do this and hopefully do it in a way that is integrated into this work you're already doing, so it doesn't cost you more money or time later.
Yeah.
So hopefully the timing works too. And I'm just interested in seeing that more granular detail given where we're at with different types of property in the state.
Yeah, and I think given where we are with that project, a report to think about how to report is perfect timing right now.
Okay.
Any more of that might have been a little dissonant with the timing for the project. Yeah, and that is, you know, just even defining the term, I think is going to take a lot of thought because, you know, like a second home might also be a farm, it might also be like a camp, as you said, which are, you know, existing property definitions. And currently the only definition of property that we use to differentiate tax rates is, you know, the product of like a self-attestation from folks either declaring their homestead or not. So I think there's a lot of interesting questions that this will raise that we can speak to.
That's great. So those are the only things. There are other things in those drafts, and I will hold off on those and perhaps introduce them as a separate bill next year. But given the timeliness of trying to get this data and integrate it with the work that tax is already doing, that's why I was hoping to get these as amendments to this bill right now. So thank you for your consideration. And if Abby, if you have the language to post so people can see it, that would be great.
And the honed down language, I guess. That
yeah, with just
we'd
these
like to have
two
in.
provisions.
Okay. Senator Bray.
They're
It is
now
a-
posted on the website.
Quick question on that last issue. So is the basic sort now residential, non-residential there? And then within non-residential, you don't get into cabins versus castles, right? There's no,
Homestead versus non-homestead.
right?
Right, for the purpose of differentiating rates, those are the only categories. And then the grand list contains other categories that are recorded for other purposes by listers and assessors.
Like agricultural and commercial, right? Okay.
Yeah, forest land, stuff like that.
Okay. So any other questions on this one? Sounds like a fairly friendly set of amendments. Chris Curtis is here, I see. I've lost my agenda again. Okay, it's timed out. So Chris, welcome. And just tell us what your pharmaceutical manufacturer
Thank you. Thank you.
request is.
Certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christopher Curtis. I'm the Chief of the Public Protection Division at the Office of the Attorney General. In that capacity, we have, of course, our Consumer Protection and Antitrust Unit, as well as our Civil Rights Unit. And it's as to the former that I come to you today. As part of our consumer protection and transparency efforts, we do receive annual reports from pharmaceutical companies when they make reports of expenditures in the state. And those expenditures can be samples, sample products, or they can be gifts if there's, a luncheon that needs to be declared as an expenditure, things like that at a conference. We receive about 200 to 225 or so reports annually from pharmaceutical manufacturers. They pay a relatively modest fee of $500 along with their disclosure reports annually. So that is about 100 to 112,500 or so, depending on the year and depending on the number of companies that are reporting. There's always a little bit of fluctuation because some companies don't have any expenditures to report in a given year. And the reason for this request or this change in the statute is not a substantive one. It was frankly a request from our business office because in the time of COVID, what was happening was the dates don't match up. And I have asked around both the folks in our shop and our business office, folks who frankly were operating in our office long before I got here. As we thought about making this request for a date change, after I had some initial conversation with the House, I reached out to Ledge Council with their assent to just trace back, like, what was the history? Why is there a discrepancy between when a company might pay a check that's $500 related to a disclosure report, but then they don't actually make the disclosure report until April 1st. And so there's a gap in time. And what has been happening with our business office is, of course, all the companies rush to make their payment before January 1 so that they comply with the law. But then our business office ends up having to issue some paper check refunds. These are not electronic debits. We don't have an easy way to just get the money back to companies that maybe don't end up filing a disclosure report. So the fact of the matter is, just administratively, it's become burdensome to have our business office go in and literally cut paper check refunds back to companies because they didn't know that they weren't going to report anything because maybe they hadn't done the process on their end of things, but they paid the check up front, and now the state of Vermont is having to issue a refund if they don't have an expenditure. So frankly, this was just a business office housekeeping request. I think, to the best of my knowledge, and everybody I've spoken with doesn't know what the rationale or justification for why those dates were bifurcated to begin with. It may be, this purely speculation, so I'm not speaking for anyone, but I hypothesize maybe if this was something that came up and there was a change made right before the bill became effective, because it happens in two places, maybe it was just a disconnect at some point and they didn't sync up. It seems to us that the best practice administratively would be make the checks due when the reports are due, so that then the company who's making the report knows whether or not to send a check in the first instance. And then we wouldn't have to be in the business of issuing refunds. So our hope is that this is truly an administrative fix. It does not change any other aspects of the reporting mechanism or the requirements under the law for the companies to pay their fees. It literally is just syncing up those two dates so that when they make their reports in April, they can also make their payments in April. And I'm happy to answer any questions to the best of my ability.
That was easy. Thank you. Taking a while, but I think we're going to get this done. I think you contacted me about it beginning of the year, and we've been trying to find a place to park it because it is one of those just kind of housekeeping things. All right. No questions?
Thank you all very much for your time
Thank
today.
you. And our next is at 2:30. Commissioner Bolio is here and Rebecca. But we do have a member of the public.
I've contacted him and asked him to join early. Maybe you could start with Commissioner Bolio and he can join.
And walk through. Now, is this the yield tax or is no, this is another section. Okay. So Commissioner Rebecca, whoever you've got set to walk us through this, the floor is yours.
I'll take this one, Madam Chair. I'm not sure I'm going to take 15 minutes, but I'll see what I can do. Craig Bolio, Tax Commissioner. Especially since we're ahead of time, I just want to take a minute and say thank you to this committee for your support on my confirmation yesterday, and specifically thank you to Senator McDonald for the very kind words that you said yesterday. That meant a lot, so I appreciate that. I'm very thankful to have the backing of you folks. I love doing this work, and very much look forward to continuing our collaboration and trying to lead my agency in a way that makes all Vermonters proud. So I just want to say that to start.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. So Section 3, I think, is the amendment for certain fields on the property tax credit claim. So this is one that the department proposed, and also the taxpayer advocate has proposed before. Currently, you can file a property tax credit, homestead declaration, and property tax credit up through October 15th, but it's a hard deadline. So anything after that, you can't file it. You can't get any credit. You can amend your household income for any credit claim that was filed timely by October 15th. And you can amend household income for up to 3 years. And that's consistent with other statutes of limitations on other tax types. But you can't amend anything else on the form. And there are other things on the form that someone might need to change. And mostly this would be from a mistake or making an error. And so what we've proposed here are those other fields where somebody could make an error. And we see this at least a handful of times every year. They include the house site value, the ownership percentage, and then the amount of taxes that were paid to the town. And so a common error that somebody might make on ownership percentage is they accidentally put the equity in their home, even though they're the sole owner. So they don't put 100%, and that drastically reduces the amount of credit that they're entitled to. And because so many folks escrow their property taxes with their mortgage, they often don't understand that change has been made until it's too late to get that change in by the October 15th deadline. And the only path for change under current law is requesting extraordinary relief through the tax commissioner, and that goes through the taxpayer advocate. For a number of reasons, that's not an ideal path. Primarily, it leads, not everybody knows that that's a viable path, right? So not everybody who might be entitled to make that correction would know to do so and would contact us to do so. And it's also, it can be challenging under the guidelines of extraordinary relief, which only grant the commissioner authority to grant extraordinary relief if a law is going to apply to somebody in an unforeseen way. Not here, this is a strict deadline, so it's not unforeseen. An unfair way, maybe you could argue that, but it's not generally what I've used, or will create financial hardship. And that's really what I have to rely on here to be able to grant these requests. But different commissioners might have different interpretations of what hardship means, right? And so over time, who's actually entitled to get this benefit might change. And really, I just look at it again as somebody who's entitled to this credit. They made an error on the form. Let's give them an opportunity to correct that error. So the ask is to allow these other fields that I had mentioned, house site value, amount of taxes paid, and ownership percentage for up to 3 years, just like other tax types and just like household income. It will not have an impact on towns, will not have a negative impact on towns. It really shouldn't involve them at all. None of these fields are fields that end up on the grand list or fields that end up in the file that the tax department sends to the towns. And it also will not require towns to print new tax bills or issue the credits. The department would issue any additional property tax credit that a taxpayer may be entitled to directly to that taxpayer. And that process is consistent with the process that exists today for anybody who's amending household income under the existing law. So from my chair, there's really no risk to this, and I see no downside. It's only upside, only to help people who deserve that help, who've made an error, who today don't have an easy path to correct that error.
Okay. And Jason Cadwell has joined us, so I'm going to go to him. And Mr. Cadwell, welcome. We just asked that you identify yourself for the record.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jason Cadwell from Shelburne. I'm a CPA and financial planner.
Okay, the floor is yours. Tell us what we need to know.
Okay. Well, I took some time to poll some of my fellow tax preparers and appreciate what the tax department is doing in providing the opportunity to amend the forms that had been previously filed. I think I would note, and this was a consensus among the folks that I spoke with, the real issue that we're seeing is situations where the homestead declaration or the household income form was missed in the filing of the return. And occasionally that's myself. It's been a few years, but I have to tell you that my practice, I work with folks with very modest income all the way up to folks with significant income. And I will tell you that the returns that I am most nervous about are the ones where the income is low, because somebody who's expecting a $1,500, $2,000 adjustment to their property taxes, and that gets missed, that's going to have a heck of a lot more impact on their household than a similar amount where you're over 200,000 on up in income. So it's not part of this this legislation, but the real problem that the preparer community sees is forms that were missed. And I don't hear that that's going to be part of this bill. So that's my input.
What forms that were missed?
The homestead declaration or the household income form.
Okay.
And that's true for preparers. It's more true for folks that are trying to do these tax returns on their own. It's a very easy miss, particularly when people are rushing.
I've dealt with the homestead one on numerous occasions and moved dates for changes, and it is one that people miss or don't realize they have to file annually. So committee, any questions at this point? Senator Sirotkin, I believe you had some questions yesterday.
It was a while back. No, I don't. I think this is really good language.
Okay. Okay, Senator Hardy.
Thank you. I just wanted to be clear. So Mr. Cadwell, you're asking to include additional things that can be amended for forms that entire forms that may have been missed? Is that correct?
Yes, I understand this language only applies to situations where the forms were actually filed, but some information is being corrected. As I understand the language of this bill, there's no allowance for filing a homestead declaration, and more importantly, the household income form to get an adjustment on someone's property taxes if it was missed.
I see. Could I just hear what the commissioner thinks of that?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. I mean, Mr. Cadwell is right that is the other major issue that we deal with, right? The hard deadline of October 15th means if you don't meet that, again, your only path is extraordinary relief. So This has been on our radar for a while, that these are very impactful credits and has a very hard deadline. I believe the taxpayer advocate a couple of times has proposed sort of a graduated penalty structure that would extend the due date for that. The other sort of elephant in the room on this is that there's two parts to that form, right? One is the homestead declaration, which puts your property at the homestead tax rate, and the other is the property tax credit, which is the state payment for the portion of property taxes. It's much easier for us to handle the property tax credit portion because that's as simple as sending a check out. Having a late homestead declaration does have larger impacts on the town. So I think my general answer to that would be, I would be a very willing participant in ways to make that system better and ways to make that deadline less punitive and less of a cliff. I might ask that happen next session when we can be more thoughtful about it, because there it will have impacts on the town. I'd want to make sure that they had an opportunity to weigh in on those impacts. And the other piece is there are some operational elements that my department would have to handle. These are, as many folks know, very confusing forms to begin with, which is why we end up in the situation where folks need to file and haven't understood that they need to file. And therefore miss out on this credit. And one of the ways that we try to minimize that confusion is only having 1 year active at a time. So when you go on our website and you hit file this credit, you're filing for the correct year. If we start to have the due dates overlap on years, we'll have to manage that. Again, that's not a reason not to do it. I'm supportive from a policy standpoint of trying to make it less punitive, but I do want to be thoughtful about that. So I think my ask would be very willing to have this discussion. Could we hold off maybe to have that more holistically next year? And I can say with certainty, our taxpayer advocate would also support that discussion. I don't want to speak for him, but this has been an issue that he's raised for a number of years as well.
And having been through several of these battles, we have moved that deadline several times, and there is always someone who misses it and calls their senator and gets it moved another time. And they're very heartrending stories. At one point, it was an entire town, but it does impact your town's ability to get a tax bill out and payments, because some of us make our first payments in August, and it's not something that would be easily added at this point in the session. There's a lot of moving parts on that.
Yeah.
So is it possible that you could just come back and talk to us about it next session, or do we need to include language to ask you to come back and talk to us about it next session?
I can guarantee you when you hear from the taxpayer advocate at our department, when he produces his report for this coming year, it will be in there again. So
Okay.
Again, you don't have to compel me to come back and talk about this. I'm happy to next year.
Great, thank you.
Ongoing issue. Senator McDonald, did you have?
No, Madam Chair, I was just going to say that that deadline plays musical chairs. It has been for the reasons that you've heard. It gets moved frequently. One of the things I appreciated from the commissioner's testimony was that the correction in the item we're dealing with can be done without a disruption to the towns, and can be done by the department, and that's substantially different than moving that other deadline. But we'll hear it. You will hear it next year.
You'll notice Ms. Dawes did not stay on for this. If we were moving that deadline, she'd still be here, and several of her colleagues.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak for her, but I do believe she had testified on this provision in House Ways and Means and had agreed that the language as is would not disrupt operations for towns.
Okay. So any other questions at this point? Okay. I'll say this point is getting to be the final point. Committee, we have now reached the break time so I can go to Ways and Means, we can continue the discussion about what we want to add on to this bill as we've gone through. And we've got the feminine hygiene S53, we've got the yield bill, we've got the things that didn't get carried over when we set the tax year, the link up, which is the earned income tax credit, the child, and the PPP. And I think the PPP is the only thing we haven't decided. Let me get out of here and find the list of the bills in committee. That's not, all right, so that's the witness list. Here it is. Get that up so I can read it.
Madam Chair, do you know when we're going to discuss the PPP question? Because I have to be out for part
We
of
can
today.
discuss it right now. What is on your mind? Because that is the one thing I'm seeing that is, I think that's it for what we had discussed. And I asked Abby to draft everything other than the PPP section.
Okay.
So
the
Senator Bray has the floor and then Senator Pearson.
My beginner's question on PPP, I suppose, is I'm still puzzling out a little bit the emails I get that talk about the undesirability of taxing next year, the 2021 forgiven loans. And what I don't understand, so I'm probably missing a fundamental accounting bit here, but if you got $100,000 of forgiven PPP money and you applied it, just to make it simple, to $100,000 worth of payroll, you would have spent that money on an allowed expense. Those expenses would reduce your tax exposure. So I'm not, in the end, it seems as though you were given that money, but because you spent it in an allowed manner, you also reduced your tax liability by the same amount. So I don't know why it's referred to as taxed still and why that's a concern.
Mr. Cadwell just popped up because I had the same question. At some point, I heard an answer. So off the cuff, Mr. Cadwell, would you like to volunteer?
Well, I thought I'd hang in here, so I thank you for asking. So I think that, we in the profession had to deal with this on the federal level because the forgiveness of the PPP loan was obviously a federal law. And the intent of the federal law was to provide an infusion of cash to businesses such that the infusion, let's call it $50,000, would help them get over this hurdle. Now, if the use of that 50,000 was going to be a non-deductible expense, then you've got $50,000 coming in as income, you've got $50,000 going out as an expense that you can't deduct. So you've got $50,000 of income. And that was, now granted, this was the federal intent, the Congress's intent was to provide an infusion of cash to help businesses through the hurdle of the pandemic. For them to come back in and say, as the IRS said back in May, that sent us all into a tizzy, the IRS came in and said, well, you can treat that income as non-taxable, but the expense is going to be non-deductible. Well, in fact, you're treating that, if that's the case, you're treating that infusion as a taxable event, and which is odd because the intent is to provide that infusion. It's kind of like getting a bro hug and the guy reaching around and grabbing your wallet out of your back pocket, because they're taking money out of your pocket that they previously gave you. And the intent was to provide that infusion. So so at the end of 2020, Congress got together and they clarified their intent that the expenses were going to be deductible. So yes, Senator Bray, it is, in my case, a $50,000 non-taxable event, but this was meant to be an infusion of 100 cents on the dollar into businesses. It wasn't intended to be 100 cents on the dollar less the taxes that you had to pay on it. Again, giving something and then taking part of it back.
Right.
And
but can I ask for a clarification there? But why, if I'm not disagreeing, when I'm having a little trouble following is, but there were stipulations on how those dollars could be spent. For instance, I thought it had to be 60% payroll and other expenses were, I mean, not everything was allowed. So right. If it was just a pure cash infusion, why would there be guidelines? Why would you call it payroll protection?
Well,
I would not call it the the Injection Act. I mean, I'm not trying to be glib. It's that it seems as though the pushback we're hearing in this committee sounds like even in Vermont, if we treated it as taxable, but you spent it within the guidelines, you would then be allowed to deduct that income and reduce your income by the same amount. So the tax liability would zero out. And that's the piece I haven't yet quite understood when I hear complaints about how the committee has not yet disposed of this question.
Sure. So let's start by remembering that this PPP money was a loan. So those categories that you're mentioning, Senator Bray, were if you spent it for the intended use for payroll, some other occupancy costs, then it was forgiven. And so the forgiveness of the indebtedness is what is being treated as non-taxable. The expenditure of the funds in the ordinary course of business would be deductible expenses, so that infusion from the PPP loan that has been forgiven is a tax neutral event. It's an income tax neutral event. If you say that the expenses that were incurred using that money are not taxable, it's the same thing as saying that income was taxable.
Okay, I am going to have to leave now to go to appropriations. Commissioner Bolio's got his hand up, and I'm going to leave you to finish this conversation if you would like. I have to go to approps. We are out. I just lost it, I believe, until 3. It's 2:45 now. So I will see you all back here at 3. And we will continue this conversation.
Can we take a break in your absence, Madam Chair?
You may take a break in my absence and we will reschedule this. Why don't we let the commissioner just give his testimony?
I'm
And
happy to
then-
just make, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak.
No,
over you.
go ahead. I've just got to leave to do this other thing.
I just have one quick example, Senator Bray, that might help illuminate how this can create challenges. One piece that we've also been talking about is how forgiveness of debt income is normally treated, and it's treated as income in the year that it's forgiven.
Yep.
But most of the for many businesses that got these loans, they will have incurred the expenses in 20 in the guidelines of the program and would receive the forgiveness in 2021. So I think that the example that you give of, well, don't I have income and then I have expenses that are offsetting that and it nets to zero, is not going to be the real world case for most of these businesses, particularly ones who got the second draw PPP, right? They're going to have taken the expenses in 20 and that will shake out however it does in their tax situation. And in 2021, they're going to need real cash to pay the Vermont liability on that income because they won't have the expenses to offset it in that year. And the challenge is that holding back some of that income or holding back some of that loan to pay the income tax debt would not have been an allowable use of those funds to then get the forgiveness. So they'll have to come up with other cash through sales or whatever else to offset that liability. So I understand that in the math exercise, it might seem like it offsets, but I think once you start looking at how these things will shake out over a number of tax years, it gets more complicated.
Well, thank you. I'm sure that now what's going to happen is over the next 48 hours, I'm going to think of a follow-up question, but thanks.
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner. As one member of the committee, that was the missing piece that it took me weeks to consider.
Happy to help to the degree I could.
Senator Brock.
I would just add that of the letters that I've gotten from people affected by this, that has probably been the most common concern that people had, because they're saying that, look, we tried to follow the rules and the rules said that if I got this money, I had to use it for those specific purposes. I couldn't hold the money back to pay any taxes, not that I anticipated that I would have to. But now that I learned that I have to, I can't use that money because I've already spent it on things that were allowed under the program to begin with, and I don't have any more money.
Senator Pearson.
Well, I'm with Sorokin. I'd like a break on this, but yep. I'm still confused because of the deductible nature of the expenses, and then the adding to that the sort of imaginary tax-free income in the first place does seem like you get twice the tax break on the top of the grant. So after the break or tomorrow or something, I hope we can keep talking about this, or maybe Jason can enlighten me offline, but thank you.
Thank you, committee. If there are no further questions for the commissioner, I would suggest we be back here at 3 o'clock.
You guys, while we're on break, I'm going to try to divvy up 360 for reporters. Is everyone except for Michael reporting a section or sections? Chris Bray, did you want to or not? She had mentioned.
She already, I thought the chair listed out sections. She told me 19 through 22. That's what she said.
Okay.